Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and the title of today's presentation is Eye Doctors from Outer Space. I know how that sounds, but I'm being totally serious. I've actually documented some 300 cases of people who have received physiological improvements as a result of a UFO encounter. And I have to tell you, eyes top the list in terms of what part of the body is receiving this kind of attention. I should also mention that when it comes to physiological effects, there are many reported cases of injuries as well, and eyes top the list there too. In fact, many people report looking at a bright UFO for too long, and they have dry eyes as a result, or perhaps inflammation or even burns. Also, I've heard after images persisting on the retina for some time, and light sensitivity, a number of different effects, but also healings. And let's see, if there's more than 20 cases I'd like to cover in this video and just show you some of the many incredible cases in which people report having been healed in their eyes as a result of a UFO encounter. There are many early cases as well as modern cases, so I'll just do a kind of chronological rundown of these cases. And the first one I want to talk about occurred to a Missouri farmer by the name of Buck Nelson. At the time, he was virtually unknown, but on July 30th, 1954, claims to have had an incredible encounter with UFOs. He was in his farmhouse listening to the radio when suddenly the radio began to static up, and he heard a strange foreign voice talking over the radio. At the same time, his animals outside began to act strangely and act up, his dog, his pony. So he runs to the window and is shocked to see a glowing disc hovering at a low altitude overhead. It's about 50 feet wide. Realizing he's seeing a UFO, he runs back and gets his camera and actually manages to photograph these things. When he returned to the window, there was 3 of them. He snapped a series of photos, at least one of which he says captured images of these saucers. So then he runs outside with his flashlight to sort of communicate with these things. And that's when something really extraordinary happened. As he says, and I'm quoting, "The most extraordinary and frightening experience during this visit came when I tried to signal with my flashlight to the disk that had come nearest to me. A bright beam of light, much hotter and brighter than the sun, was thrown onto me, jolting me with a current that threw me to the ground. Because I suffered from lumbago and neuritis, I was afraid to move and get up, and of getting another jolt. When I did get up, however, I was amazed to find the pains had gone. They haven't bothered me since." And not only that, he says his vision was dramatically improved. So essentially, Buck Nelson was healed of 3 different conditions as a result of being struck by this beam of light from a UFO. And that evening, ETs showed up. He said there was a group of men, human-looking, except perhaps more muscular than the average person. And they proceeded to give him what he calls the 12 laws of God, which are essentially the 10 commandments in a slightly altered form. And they also warned him about nuclear power. As they told him, and I'm quoting, "We are here to see which way this world will use atomic power, for peace or war." So this was the first of many encounters, Buck Nelson says, and in which he was taken into these craft, and he says, to the moon and other planets within our solar system. He ended up writing a small book about his encounters called My Trip to Mars, the Moon, and Venus, and ended up actually becoming pretty popular in his area. He would hold UFO conventions, which would attract many hundreds of people. And at the time, his case wasn't really taken seriously by researchers who pointed to the obvious sort of ridiculous elements in his account of being taken to planets within our solar system. However, some researchers did take his case seriously and still do. And one of them is Gordon Creighton, who's actually a very prominent and respected researcher, was the editor of the Flying Saucer Review for many years. That's a leading UFO publication. And Gordon Creighton was impressed by the case, and as he says, I am perfectly aware that nowadays virtually nobody wants to put any credence in Buck Nelson's contactee story. Nevertheless, it is the policy of Flying Saucer Review to look most carefully and objectively at every claim that comes to us, no matter how preposterous it may seem at first sight. I suggest that in view of all that we have heard and learned, if not about UFOs, at least about the UFO reports, in the 15 years since Buck Nelson told his story, you will be well advised to approach it with an open mind and be prepared to study every detail. For if Buck Nelson invented this affair, then it seems that many of the features of his account are nothing short of prophetic. And the reason Gordon Creighton is saying this is because, the accounts of being struck by a beam of light and healed, it's something that we've seen quite a lot in other cases, not to mention spiritual messages and warnings of nuclear proliferation and this sort of thing. At any rate, that's one of the early cases involving a healing of the eyes, but certainly not the only one. There's another one very much like it, which was reported actually by a sign painter by the name of Howard Menger. I've talked about Howard Menger's case before. He's from Highbridge, New Jersey, and claims to have had contact with human-looking ETs. And there are elements of his story that, like Buck Nelson, seem to be very difficult to reconcile with what we know today in terms of him being taken to other planets in our solar system and things like this. However, Howard Menger also talks about how he was able to bring his friends to some of these contacts, and they also saw the UFO and, in at least one case, the ETs as well. So he does have outside witnesses, and again, his case has elements we see in others. The case is controversial for sure, but according to Howard Menger, in April of 1945, he was part of World War II in the Army and was in the unit that was trying to take over the island of Okinawa, which at that time was held by the Japanese. But after saturating the island with bombs, the United States took over the island and established a stronghold. And it was here that Howard Menger says he had a very strange experience. He was out on the airport runway when a shell from an incoming artillery landed short and exploded on the runway. He ducked and thought at first he had escaped injury, but that turned out not to be the case. As he says, as I got to my feet, I felt something stinging in my right eye. I put my hand to my eye and managed to pick something out with my fingers. It was a piece of shrapnel. So Howard was rushed to the hospital tents on the island, and was immediately treated for his injury. Unfortunately, his eye became infected, and the infection spread to his other eye, and he became totally blind. It was at this point that he began to be visited by a nurse who he was never able to identify. She was sort of a mystery nurse, and she approached him and cared for him and told him that his vision would be restored. And it was. I tried to find out who the nurse was, but was never successful in finding it out. He suspects that she was one of the space people, because it was a few weeks after that he had another contact and was told by the ETs that he was part of a mission with them. They told him, and I'm quoting, we have been spending a lot of time conditioning you and preparing you for your work to come. We are contacting people all over the world. Yeah, Howard Menger ended up writing a book about his encounters called From Outer Space to You, and a controversial story to say the least, but one of many people reporting eye healings. And his case is actually virtually identical to another one, which occurred around the same time and under very similar circumstances. This next case occurred on July 7th, 1944, actually. This was during World War II, and a soldier by the name of Helge Lindros from Finland was fighting the war when an artillery shell exploded right in front of him and sent shrapnel all over his front part of his body and blinded him. He was sent home, and doctors did what they could for him, but they were not able to restore his sight. And his condition, they told him, was chronic. He would never see again. However, that's not what ended up happening. It was about a year and a half later, in the autumn of 1945, that Helge says he was visited in his home by human-like figures. He couldn't see them at first, of course, but they came in and began treating him using lights and weird instruments and cured him of his blindness, at which point he did see what they looked like. They were human-looking, wearing long white robes. They also cured his arm of an injury he had received during the war, and afterwards left through the wall. And before they did, however, they told him that the reason he had been healed was because he had been selected to help others. So this is a theme that does turn up in other cases. The ETs are healing people who they say have a mission on Earth in some capacity. So those are some really early cases, but definitely there's some pretty significant cases as time goes on. Here's a very strange case, which I'm including in this list. This occurred in July of 1952 to a lady by the name of Marianne Cassio Shenafield. She's from Agawam, Massachusetts, and as a very young girl, 11 years old, had an incredible encounter. This was July of 1952. She was out in her backyard playing when she saw a metallic object just move overhead, totally silent, very low level, and next thing she knows, she's being approached by what we now know as a gray-type humanoid. She says it was dressed in a crinkly kind of silver suit with a black belt. The belt itself had a little box on it covered with colored buttons, and next thing Marianne knows, she's on board a craft. Presumably she's being laid out and examined. She turns to her right, and she can see there's an image of the inside of her body, all her organs in full living color, like a hologram, hovering right next to her. And it shocked her so much that she actually vomited, at which point the ETs put a mask over her face, perhaps to give oxygen, she thinks. And that's all she really remembers, except being returned to her home. Following this, Marianne's vision began to deteriorate very quickly, and she went to the doctor, and the diagnosis was devastating. She had a condition known as Stargardt's disease. This causes a degeneration of the macula, and as a result, Marianne was unable to see through her central focus of vision and through much of her peripheral vision. She had only a little bit of peripheral vision left. So it was a devastating thing, and somehow related perhaps to this encounter. Perhaps they knew it was going to happen and were examining her. There's no evidence that they actually did anything to cause this, but there does seem to be a weird connection there. At any rate, that's how it remained for many years. It was actually 20 years later, in 1972, Marianne was in her home when she started hearing strange beeps. And next thing she knows, she's not in her home. And she believes she was taken on board again. Uh, she did not see the ETs, but she felt herself being physically examined and definitely knew she was not in her home and was returned back to her home, at which point weird things started to happen. She started hearing this beeping noise in her head, very pronounced, and she wasn't able to explain that. And then on March 15th, 1974, something truly miraculous happened. Marianne's vision was completely restored. She could see just fine. Stargardt's disease is supposedly chronic and curable. So the first thing she did was call her doctor and told him what happened. And he says, "This is impossible. You must be hallucinating." And because Stargardt's disease is not reversible. She assured him she was not hallucinating, that she could see perfectly just fine. And unfortunately, this condition, this reversal, lasted for only 10 minutes. Very short period. And her Stargardt's disease reinserted itself and she could no longer see. So that was a very strange episode, which she has no idea how to explain, other than she thinks it may have something to do with her UFO contacts. And following this is when things became very strange. While she still suffered from Stargardt's disease, her psychic vision began to improve dramatically. She started having incredible psychic visions. It started out with weird formulas and equations, genetic codes, colorful geometric shapes, numbers, letters, landscapes, and more. And this was followed by all kinds of weird paranormal and poltergeist phenomena. She ended up calling the doctors and even priests to help her, but none were able to help her with this condition. And she ended up becoming a very powerful psychic and could see people's auras. And she said just by looking at a person's aura, she could tell whether or not this person was an experiencer. That's something I've heard before, so I definitely find that interesting. It's a very strange case related to vision, and that's why I included it on this list. Next case I want to talk about is also very interesting. This occurred to a lady who reported her case to MUFON anonymously. I'll just call her Donna. And Donna was born in 1947 in a small town in Ohio. And she had some serious health problems from birth. It turns out her parents had different blood types and had different Rh factors in their blood. So this caused a difficult pregnancy. And as a result, Donna was born with some problems. She had a curvature of the spine and was diagnosed also with PKY, which is the real name is phenylketonuria, and that's a metabolic disorder. And Donna had to have a blood transfusion upon birth, and this also caused more problems. As a result of the blood transfusion, which did not go as planned, she suffered some minor brain damage, and the vision in her left eye deteriorated dramatically, and she also suffered from epilepsy. So yeah, from the very beginning, poor Donna had a number of pretty severe health problems. But it wasn't long before ETs intervened. She was actually only 4 years old, and in 1950, she was in her bedroom suffering from a toothache, and suddenly the room filled with light. She's lying on her stomach, and the room fills with this beautiful golden light, she says, and somebody approached her. It was a figure. She couldn't really see what they looked like, except they touched her shoulder, and then she felt what felt like hands or fingers going up and down her spine, sort of massaging it. And it felt like there was more than one person, or perhaps even instruments. At any rate, it was a very pleasant feeling. She wasn't scared in the least. And that's all she really remembers. She woke up the next morning in excruciating pain. Her toothache was gone, but her back hurt real bad. her parents took her to the doctors, and that was when they got a really incredible surprise. Donna's curvature of her spine had been somehow reversed. She no longer had a spinal curvature. So that was an amazing cure, to say the least. Her toothache was also gone. And it was 3 years after that that she had another incredible encounter. It's now 1953. She's 6 years old. She's outside of her home with her family and a number of neighbors when a UFO shows up. And it's circling around. It's pretty low altitude, and it starts flashing lights at the people, and perhaps at Donna directly, because she had a very strong reaction to one of these flashes of light. As she says, and I'm quoting, "When the white light came on, I noticed a burning sensation that went from the base of my spine and to the top of my head and centered in my throat. After that, my defective vision in my left eye was corrected, and I never had another epileptic seizure after that. My intelligence went up after I was healed too." She was surprised to notice this dramatic increase in her intelligence, and actually went and took an IQ test and scored 150 IQ, which is well above genius level. So this is not the only case I've heard of people who've actually, had their intelligence improved. So this completely transformed her spiritually, mentally, and physically. She had a couple of other UFO sightings following this as a young adult and as an adult, and other paranormal experiences. And says she feels completely spiritually transformed. As she says, and I'm quoting, "When I'm in a certain set of circumstances, I can see auras, and I can go into a trance and receive messages telepathically." So that's another case where we see the ETs are improving perhaps not only your physical vision, but your inner psychic vision. So I find these cases fascinating because there's just so many of them. Here's another case which occurred in March of 1968. The main witness is Ricardo Castillo Trujillo. He's a janitor from Valparaiso, Chile. And he was outside his home when he saw this glowing object overhead, and shortly later, two figures appeared. And Ricardo wore glasses, and they started asking him about that and his nearsightedness, and told him that they were actually able to cure his condition, which they did. And according to Ricardo, and I'm quoting, "I didn't understand them too good, but the fact is that I can see real good and without glasses." The beings told Ricardo that they would return for him, though I don't know if that ever happened. But this case was published in the March 18, 1968 issue of La Nación in Santiago, Chile. It's a pretty interesting case. One of my favorite cases of this kind comes from researchers Ralph and Judy Bloom. They wrote an excellent book called Beyond Earth, Man's Contact with UFOs, and they talk about an amazing eye healing case, which was actually one of the first UFO healing cases to be revealed. The main witness is an anonymous Peruvian customs official who was out on his balcony, he says, when he saw a glowing disc at a pretty high altitude, and he's looking up at it trying to figure out what it is when it sends down a violet beam of light. It was very thin, and it struck him on the face and chest, and dazed him, left him kind of disoriented for a second. This object moves off, and instantly this Peruvian customs official noticed that his vision had been improved. At the time, he wore very thick glasses for his nearsightedness, and he was unable to see wearing his glasses and took them off and noticed that he could see perfectly. His vision had been restored. And not only that, he suffered from rheumatism. Over the days and weeks that followed, his rheumatism cleared up and never returned. And that was a chronic condition. So, like many people who have experienced healing, he received a double healing of more than one condition. So that's a really incredible case. Another case that I'd like to talk about actually comes from a Brazilian researcher by the name of Mario Rangel. He contacted me after hearing about my research into these types of cases. He wrote a book called Alien Abductions, which was published in Portuguese, and he wanted to share this case, which he had investigated involving a young girl by the name of Dirce. Dirce lived in a very rural area in Brazil, in a small town, and around age 9, she was in school and not doing well, and her parents were trying to figure out why, and they took her to an eye doctor and discovered that she suffered from extremely poor vision. And they had not realized that, and so they took her to the eye doctor, but it turned out her condition was so bad that local eye doctors could not help her. And finally they decided they were going to order a very specialized pair of eyeglasses from Japan. And they were waiting for these eyeglasses to arrive when something truly miraculous happened. Dirce was in the backyard. She had gone out to feed the family dog when suddenly she says she was approached by a 6-foot-tall figure. When this figure approached her, both she and the dog became paralyzed temporarily, unable to move, and this being flashed a beam of light on Dirce, and the beam of light retracted, the being departed, and Dirce ran back inside and told her parents what had happened. And within a half an hour of being struck by this beam of light, Dirce's vision returned to a normal, healthy condition. She could see perfectly without glasses. So again, I'm not sure why they're healing a 9-year-old girl from a small town in Brazil, but this is the kind of thing we're seeing. All kinds of people are being healed. Here's another very interesting case, which also comes from Brazil. And the main witness in this case is a chicken and cattle farmer by the name of Jose Benedito Bogueio. In 1964, he was 39 years old. This is in the town of Pinheiro, Brazil. And Jose was having a problem with his septum, a deviated septum, which was causing very bad headaches. And so he decided to have surgery on his septum. And it did relieve the headaches, except actually the consequences were perhaps worse. As a result of surgery, Jose went totally deaf. And not only that, his vision deteriorated very badly. So the surgery was not really a huge success by any means, and he ended up having to wear very thick glasses and could not hear. And it was many years later, in 1977, some 13 years later, when Jose had a very powerful UFO experience. He was walking back to his home. He was outside of his home when suddenly he noticed a 60-foot-long V-shaped craft hovering overhead. It was sending down a beam of light, and it appeared to be following him. So he had a flashlight with him, and he turned on his flashlight and shined it at the UFO. And the UFO responded by beaming an orange beam of light onto Jose. And it hit him hard. It shocked him and knocked him unconscious. And when he woke up, he was no longer outside of his home. He was in a strange room. He was surrounded by human-looking figures dressed in gray and brown clothes, he said. And he was led out of this room outside, and that's when he got a real shock. He did not appear to be on Earth anymore. There were strange buildings, strange plant life, and strange UFO-like vehicles all around him. And they led him into one of these other vehicles, and that's all he really remembers. Next thing he knows, he's waking up alongside the highway. However, where he was really quite shocking. He awakened about 8 miles west of Sao Luis, which is more than 70 miles from his original location where he was taken. He was suffering from pretty severe pain in his right side and his back, and for about 8 days he had no energy and no appetite. Thankfully, his energy and his appetite did return, but for at least 2 months he was forced to walk with a cane because of these injuries he had received from his encounter. One thing he didn't notice at first was that he was no longer wearing his glasses, and in fact his glasses were missing. Turned out, however, he didn't need them. As he says, "It wasn't until I got home the next day that I realized I lost them. Since then, I haven't needed to wear glasses anymore." And also amazing was that he could hear. His deafness wasn't entirely improved, but he could definitely hear loud noises like shouting or car horns or ambulance sirens and things like this. So that was pretty interesting, to say the least. Unfortunately, his case had a kind of a tragic end. 13 years later, he had a severe car accident, and as a result, his deafness reinserted itself, and also his vision became poor again and deteriorated. So these cures are not always permanent, and unfortunately it wasn't permanent in Jose's case. Nevertheless, it is a very interesting case, and one of many actually which have occurred in Brazil. There's another case which occurred in 1978. This was published in a Brazilian UFO magazine. The witness is anonymous, but we do know he comes from the town of João Pessoa in Paraíba, Brazil. And this actually wasn't a healing, but it could have been. It's a very interesting case because the witness says he woke up and saw 2 figures standing next to his bed, and one of them was holding a vial, sort of a crystal vase, filled with a weird blue liquid. And the beings told him that they were there to cure him of a festering eye problem. Unfortunately, the witness became terrified and shouted at them to leave, which they did. So he did not get healed, but he could have been. He just was too frightened, apparently, and the beings left before they were able to effect a healing. There are many cases. One series of cases I've talked about before comes from Denise and Bert Twiggs. They were a family from Oregon, Hubbard, Oregon, and I've talked about them before. It's a very strange contactee case. It started out as a pretty terrifying abduction, really, but as they evolved in their contact, became a very friendly contactee case with a lot of really unusual and bizarre elements. I think probably these elements are more common than most people think, except most people don't have the courage to talk about them. They do report a number of healings. Each member of the family has received healings, including their young son, Christopher. In December of 1989, Christopher had developed a sty in his eye, and Denise was going to take him to the doctor the next day. However, that night, they were taken onto the craft, the mothership as they call it, and Christopher was taken into the medical room and treated for the sty, and in the morning it was gone. That was not Christopher's only healing. Later he would have a healing for his asthma, his condition of asthma. So I won't get into the whole case involving Denise and Bert Twiggs, but it's definitely an interesting uh, close encounter. And as Denise Twiggs says regarding Christopher's healing, after a trip to the medical room aboard the ship, his eye was nearly healed the next day. One of my favorite cases, or certainly a very interesting case of eye healing, comes from a lady from Virginia. Beth Collings is her name. I believe that might be a pseudonym. At any rate, she also wrote a book along with her friend Anna Jamerson. It's an excellent book called Connections, and it talks about their many encounters, including a miraculous eye healing that they both had. For Beth, it began in December of 1992 when she saw this metallic UFO come at a very low level over her car. And it sent down a beam of light which caused the engine to fail. All she really remembers is gripping the steering wheel and being unable to move. And next thing she knows, this object is gone, and she races home. And as Beth says, and I'm quoting, "The first thing that I noticed from that first experience was that my contact lenses appeared to be missing from my eyes, and I certainly had them in when I was driving." And turned out she didn't need them. Her eyesight had dramatically improved. She ended up going under hypnosis and learned that she was having contact with gray-type ETs. And although they did heal her, she finds these encounters pretty terrifying, and she has no control over them, and she's certainly not happy about them. They haven't always been friendly. On one occasion, they took her, and when they returned her, they didn't put her back in her bedroom where they'd taken her. They left her outside in the cold, and as a result, she had severe frostbite on the bottoms of her feet. So yeah, this has not always been a good thing for her. However, yeah, she had her eyes healed, and so did her friend Anna Jamerson. Anna Jamerson actually owns a horse farm in Virginia, and Beth Collings works with her. But Anna Jamerson, when Beth was healed, had a real shock because Anna had noticed a significant improvement in her own eyesight and didn't know how it had happened. And after it happened to her friend Beth, she realized, oh my gosh, maybe this is due to ET contact. And she did have a number of strange experiences in her life and ended up going under hypnosis. And like Beth, realized she was having lifelong contact with ETs. And one of these results of her contact was her eyes being healed. As Anna says, and I'm quoting, "My eyes had improved dramatically, and I could think of no other rational explanation why my eyesight was improving unless I, too, was being abducted." So yeah, she found out she was in fact an abductee, and has had a lot of contact with ETs. She's not particularly happy with them either. And like Beth Collings, they feel like they're kind of being treated like lab rats. At any rate, the ETs do seem to be interested in her health. On another occasion, they gave her dietary advice. As she says, and I'm quoting, "I have memories of the gray ones putting a patch on my chest between my collarbones, and I watched fascinated as it was absorbed into my body. I remember being told that I must not eat fat because my fat-to-muscle ratio is out of balance." At that time, Anna was having trouble digesting fatty foods, which had been causing her stomach pains, and she had lost 15 pounds as a result. So yeah, she was not happy being called fat by the Greys and being given dietary advice and told not to eat fatty foods. At any rate, it's one of many cases. Another case, which I think is very well verified, in fact, one of the better verified UFO healing cases in general, comes from respected researcher John Carpenter, who has investigated UFO abductions for many years. The main witness in this case is a gentleman by the name of Eddie, who is a 21-year-old man from the Midwestern United States. John Carpenter had been seeing Eddie regularly because Eddie was having encounters. And it was during one of these many contacts that Eddie says he was healed. As John Carpenter says, and I'm quoting, "During a physical examination by the beings, Eddie's right eye was removed. He felt it pulled out and replaced. Afterwards, there was a redness, a physical soreness. He did not feel they were implanting anything behind his eye, only that they were fixing him. The side benefit of this operation appears to be enhanced colors. The procedure was clearly for their purposes, not for Eddie's, but for the partial accidental cure of his lifelong color blindness was a side effect." So I'm not sure how John Carpenter can make that conclusion that it wasn't for Eddie's benefit and it was for the ET's benefit, because in fact it did benefit the witness. He had had profound color blindness, and following this operation, his vision was improved all the way up to only green color blindness. Green was the only color he couldn't see. What I like about this case is John Carpenter took the extra step of getting a statement from Eddie's doctor verifying this cure. So it's absolutely an excellent and very well verified case. And I can tell you that most major researchers have uncovered UFO healing cases. So it doesn't surprise me to hear John Carpenter reporting a healing case. Another really excellent case was published in the book Beyond UFOs, which was edited by Ray Hernandez and comes from the Free organization, which found that up to 50% of people have reported healing or healing type experiences as a result of a UFO encounter. And one of these cases was published in this book, Beyond UFOs, and the main witness is Alberto Fernandez, and it's really an excellent case. Alberto was originally from Santiago, Cuba, but moved to Florida, where he joined the Army and then became a police officer and later an agent for the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. And throughout his life had experienced numerous UFO and alien sightings, with one particularly dramatic encounter with a gray alien. However, important here was what happened in 2001 at age 56. Alberto suffered a fall, causing multiple fractures to the orbit of his right eye. He rushed off to the emergency room and where he was treated for the injury, and they told him he would have to visit an ophthalmologist to assess his vision after his injuries healed. At the time, Alberto and his wife had been planning for a long ocean cruise with their family. And Alberto decided he was going to go on the cruise against the recommendation of his doctors and his family, because the swelling had reduced considerably, but his vision was still pretty severely impaired. So he went on the cruise, and as the cruise continued, Alberto's vision did not improve. And he went to the ship's doctor to just have the doctor check up on his eye injuries. And the doctor was absolutely shocked by the severity of Alberto's injuries and actually wanted to evacuate Alberto from the ship by helicopter. Alberto refused, and they completed the cruise, and 3 weeks later they returned to their home in Florida, and Alberto went straight to the eye doctor, and the eye doctor says, well, now we can see that your eye injuries are healing, but your cornea is torn. And there we can treat you, but there will probably be a permanent loss of vision, and you're very likely going to develop glaucoma, and you'll have to have regular treatment for the rest of your life. So the diagnosis was pretty devastating, and Alberto probably should not have gone on that cruise, but that was where things remained for the moment. However, 5 days later, Alberto woke up in his bedroom, and there was an entity standing next to his bed. And the entity shone this green laser-like light into the injured eye, and the green light flashed multiple times and then stopped, at which point the entity left. And the next morning, Alberto woke up to find that his vision was now perfect. And in fact, there was no sign at all of any injury. He returned to the eye doctor for an examination. The doctor was, of course, completely shocked by the healing and told Alberto that, as far as he could tell, his eye was absolutely normal and his vision was perfect. So it's an incredible case of an eye healing, and not only the injury is verified by the witness and by his family, but by doctors as well, and so is the healing. And he himself is a good witness, a trained observer, police officer, and agent for the federal government. So a really incredible case, which was actually investigated by a doctor, Dr. Joseph Burks, MD, who wrote about his case in the book, Beyond UFOs. So there are many cases which are much more modern as well. Another case occurred in January of 2005 to a lady by the name of Allison who had been having regular contact. And Allison said that she woke up one day to see a mantis-type being in her bedroom. At this time, she felt a strong energy pulsing through her, and she says the mantis being placed a very bright orb, an orb of light, in front of her face. And as Allison says, I'm quoting, "The light was going right through my eyes and into my brain. They said to look at the light and not look away. Hold there. There was a lot of pressure in my eyes and a remarkable emotional response that made me nauseous." And afterwards they told her, "Make sure you look into the light every morning and every night." Allison woke up that morning feeling like she had had surgery. She had a headache and there was a soreness in her eyes. However, ultimately she believes this procedure was a healing procedure. As she says, "I think this healing was to help me physically with my eyes, but also to help me with my clairvoyance." Because, following this, she started to have more clairvoyant type visions. And again, this is the thing we see in other cases. She continued to have other really remarkable experiences. As she says, and I'm quoting, "I've had other ET experiences where I remember seeing the inside of my bloodstream and even the insides of my organs and cells magnified and projected in a way that I could see it for myself. The ET doctors would relay with me what they thought was happening. In any case, I don't mind. They seem to make themselves available to me too, to help me heal, grow, learn, and to expand my mind." So it's a very interesting case, and again shows that it's not only healing of the physical eyes, but of the inner psychic vision. And they heal a wide variety of eye conditions. I mean, we've seen blindness and nearsightedness and other conditions. So there's also a condition known as nyctalopia, or night blindness. This is the inability to see well at night. And it's not a super common condition, but it certainly turns up more often in elderly people. At any rate, this case occurred on January 10th, 2008, to a husband and wife. They were driving from Tacoma, California to Las Vegas along Highway 160 when they had a very strange encounter. There was this UFO hovering over the highway. It wasn't super low, but it wasn't very high up either. And he tried to point these objects out to his wife, but his wife seemed strangely uninterested. But the husband is absolutely convinced he saw a UFO. But it was following this incident on the drive back from Vegas to Tacoma that the husband noticed a very strange effect in his vision. As he says, and I'm quoting, "On the drive back to Tacoma, I was astonished to find my night vision was restored. The halos I'd become used to seeing around oncoming headlights were gone, and I could actually see the road ahead as the headlights passed. It lasted only a week or so, but man, that was a great thing. I don't know for sure that it was associated with whatever it was I saw in the sky, but I do know that my vision immediately after I saw the lights was a whole lot better than before." So another very interesting case which appears to be directly tied to a UFO encounter. And there are all kinds of very strange effects that people are reporting in their vision. Here's another case involving what appears to be a multiple healing, and also has some other very strange details. The main witness in this case is Corey, who at age 16 was at Boy Scout camp when he was visited in his tent by a gray ET. For him, it was a very pleasant experience. He was physically examined, but it wasn't scary at all. In fact, he wanted to go with the gray. The gray said, "No, but we will return for you." And in fact, they did. In 2009, many years later, as an adult, Corey woke up one morning and found these strange marks on his back. And as soon as he saw them, a memory flooded into his mind of what happened that night. And what he recalled was really very strange. He recalled being in this strange room, a normal kind of building, with his wife and a bunch of other people, as if they were all being herded together. And they were all taken into a landed craft by these gray ETs who were kind of disguised as human looking, but Corey somehow saw through their disguise and realized that these are gray ETs. And they were taken to this large, what appeared to be a medical facility, and everyone was being laid out on tables and physically examined or operated on. And Corey at one point was able to look around and saw that on the table next to him there was a gentleman whose eye was being removed by a gray ET, actually taken out of the eye socket. This is something we do here in UFO cases, as we heard in the case by John Carpenter. Certainly Betty Andreasen reported this as well. And that's what this witness says he saw happening to another person. So it was not a super nice encounter, but ultimately Corey takes a benevolent viewpoint towards these ETs. That's all he really remembers, except waking up the next morning and noticing some really dramatic physiological improvements. Before this, he had poor vision, and it was dramatically improved. He had recently had an operation by Earth doctors to improve the joints in his shoulders, which he had a problem with his joints, not only in his shoulders, but in his knees as well. And following this apparent UFO experience, Corey noticed that his knees had been healed as well. And he wonders if perhaps the ETs did an operation very much like the humans did on his shoulders. In fact, that's what he believed happened. As he says, and I'm quoting, I believe the aliens examined my shoulders and saw the types of surgeries that were done on them, and did something similar with my knees. I believe that other people that I was with had similar things done to them by the aliens. I also have noticed that my vision has become better and my sense of smell is better. So again, they seem to be upgrading people, and people are receiving multiple cures as a result of one single experience. Here's a very bizarre case, and I've never heard of anything like this before or since. This occurred on October 4th, 2014. This was reported to MUFON, as were some of the other cases I had just mentioned, like the above case and the one before that. At any rate, this occurred on October 4th, 2014, in the town of Colorado Springs, Colorado. A gentleman had gone to visit friends and was at their house when he decided to go outside and look at the stars. And it was weird because he smelled a very strong odor of ozone, although the sky was perfectly clear. And that was a little confusing to him until suddenly he saw this object very high up in the sky darting around. It was a star-like object which was making zigzagging motions, appearing and disappearing. He called out his friend to look at it, and his friend saw it and had no idea what it was. But as it zigzagged around, his friend became frightened and ran back inside. And the main witness, this gentleman, watched this object zigzag around for a few more minutes until it was joined by another object, at which point the two objects darted away. The gentleman went back inside and was surprised to find that more than an hour had passed. He thought maybe it had been about 10 minutes. So that certainly confused him. As he says, the whole event seemed to take only about 7 or 8 minutes, but when they were gone, I went in and discovered nearly an hour had passed. He later found out that other people had seen these, apparently the same UFOs, on the same night in the same area. But what was really weird was what happened to his vision in the days that followed. As he says, and I'm quoting, "For several weeks, a strange effect on my eyesight was very noticeable. Occasionally, I could see for miles with almost binocular-like vision." So that's incredible. I mean, almost like telescopic vision, something we know, eagles can do. And I've never heard this reported before or since in any other UFO contact case. So that alone makes this case very interesting. Here's a really wonderful case, and one of the last I'd like to talk about. There's one after this. But this case involves a lady who was cured of glaucoma. She would not allow me to use her real name, but she did provide a very detailed interview about her experience, which was truly remarkable. It occurred in 2013. This was in a small town in the state of Maine. And sometime earlier, at around age 46, Sonia was diagnosed with glaucoma. And glaucoma is a condition which kind of results in the deterioration of vision, and is caused by a thinning of the optic nerve. Sonia was married at the time, and her husband has had repeated contact with praying mantis type ETs. And Sonia herself has also had UFO contact throughout her life. So one evening, they decided to go camping in the woods behind their home, which is very rural. And they thought, perhaps, let's see if we can ask the ETs to cure them. They wondered if they might be able to make a, quote, mental connection and ask them to heal Sonia, because she was not only dealing with the glaucoma, but with some chronic pain issues. So neither were sure if anything would happen. However, apparently the ETs were listening, because in fact something did happen. As Sonia says, I slept on the ground inside a sleeping bag. In the middle of the night, I awoke hearing what sounded like insect chatter above my head. This was like nothing else I've ever heard in my life. It was as if there were large insects that were talking to each one another. And I know that sounds strange, but that's the best description I can come up with. Sonia was lying face down when this happened, and as this was going on, she remained perfectly still. And without any warning, she felt a strong, vibrating energy strike her. As she says, what I felt was a rotating force above the back of my head, ending in a zap in the center of the head, seemingly between the two hemispheres of the brain, or in the general area of the optic nerve. And it was not an unpleasant experience for her, although it was a very powerful feeling. She felt like they were trying to help her. And in fact, they were. And she noticed a dramatic improvement in her vision when she woke up the next morning. So she was super excited about that. And her pain issues were also, her chronic pain issues had improved as well. And when she went to the doctor, she got really good news, and the doctor was amazed. As she says, my left optic nerve grew thicker, and I had the best visual field test in years, which astonished my ophthalmologist. After 2 years of a thinning optic nerve, it had grown thicker after the event. So, an amazing cure, which was verified by her doctor. And not only that, she would have other healing encounters later on, dealing with other health issues and her chronic pain. And she says it's been a very benevolent encounter from beginning to end. She says, it's been the most wonderful experience in my life. I've even told them that they've brought me a lot of joy. I'm seeking an ongoing relationship with them to understand things better. It's a really amazing case where she asked for a healing and received it, which is actually pretty rare among the documented cases of UFO healings, but certainly not unique. And one of the most recent eye healing cases that I could find actually was from the FREE study by Ray Hernandez, and I don't have a whole lot of details on this one. I wasn't able to interview the witness directly. However, a lady who was having regular contact asked if they could heal her husband of detached retina, which they did. That they healed the retina. Now we can heal this ourselves, Earth doctors, using laser surgery. However, the ETs did it for him. So it's a really amazing case and shows probably once again the ET's ability to cure a wide variety of eye problems. A lot of these healings do seem to be used using light. I put together a whole chapter on eye healings in my book, The Healing Power of UFOs, which documents, as I said, some 300 cases. I'm guessing there's a lot more than that because most people do not report their UFO encounters, especially if it's something very strange, like a healing. However, these eye healings are, I think, really good evidence, not only of ETs themselves, but of their agenda, which I believe is healing humanity. With 300 cases, I think we can say pretty confidently that that is one of their agendas. And I'm very encouraged by that, to say the least. And that's why I wanted to put together this video, which I hope that you've enjoyed. And I want to thank you once again for listening. And as I love to say, because I think it's important, we've got to keep having fun. Till next time.